This is the lecture on Levy Chapter 3, also known as Research Design. This is where we start getting into the literature review project that you're going to have to do for your midterm exam. So just kind of to review, for the midterm exam for this class, you're to develop an original research idea on the topic of how one's social network influences beliefs in political conspiracy theories. You have to connect enough of a literature review to figure out a gap in the literature that your idea can fill, and then you submit the following. So you're going to have a whole review of the literature on why people believe conspiracy theories, then another review of the literature on how social networks influence political behaviors or attitudes. Then you'll have a section that merges those together, and then you're going to state your hypothesis. The political science department requires that you use Chicago-style formatting. Public policy and administration, I think Chicago will be fine for those things too. And so then to get a C, each set of literature should contain 10 peer-reviewed sources. So to get a C on this assignment, you should have 30 peer-reviewed sources that you include. I know that seems a little overwhelming at the moment, but don't worry. Stick with me. Keep up. You'll get there. You'll be able to do it. Lots of people before you have done it successfully. So here's what this is what a research design would look like, right? You're going to have some kind of an introduction. I don't require you to write that for your midterm exam. Then you're going to have a review of the first literature, a review of the second literature, then you merge them together, and then you state your hypothesis. So let's kind of go through these in a little bit more detail. So the first thing you have to do is choose a research question. Lucky for you, I already gave you the research question. How social networks influence belief in conspiracy theories. For you, if it's not this class, the only thing that really kind of limits you in your question you could ask is, because it's political science, it should be something related to politics and government. And it has to be something that can be observed or measured. And then you focus on the behavior of, like in political science, we focus on these 4 units of analysis, right? You could focus on individuals. Why do people do what they do politically? Why do they protest? Why do they riot? Why do they vote? Why don't they vote? Why do they support some things? Why do they not? You could focus on groups. Why do African Americans do this? Why are Latinos like this? Why do rich people tend to behave this way? You could look at gender groups, right? You could look at institutions, which would be like Congress or city governments or mayors or city planners or presidents. You could look at that. And you could also look at jurisdictions like the United States compared to China, compared to Russia. You could compare states where you're looking at like Utah versus Idaho, or comparing states within the United States to states within India. The important thing is to know what your unit of analysis is, because the literature review that you do is going to be focused on that, right? So let's say that I'm interested in understanding why Russia and the United States have the relationship they have in international relations. Some people will use psychology literature, right? They'll say, well, individuals do this and this and this and this. And then they'll say, and therefore that's why United States does this and Russia does this. But United States and Russia are each made up of hundreds of millions of people. So you can't use psychology that talks about what happens in an individual's brain to explain the behavior of hundreds of millions of people. So you have to make sure that your literature that you're reviewing matches the unit of analysis that you're using in your paper. A good research question should be very specific. Is Islamic culture incompatible with democracy? That's the Samuel Huntington Clash of Civilizations thesis, right? Why did evangelicals vote for Mitt Romney? Are Catholics more likely to support authoritarian leaders? It's very specific. In each of these questions, I know exactly how I would measure those things. So your question should be in a way that you can know how it's going to be measured. And you should avoid normative ideas. Normative deals with right and wrong, good and bad, right? So is it wrong to smoke marijuana? That's not an empirical question. That's not a question you can answer with the tools of social science. That's a question you can answer with religion, perhaps. Maybe moral philosophy might help you in that sense. But is it wrong to smoke marijuana? That's something that can, you could say, well, do people that smoke marijuana have health problems? That's something you could ask and measure. But right and wrong, or best and worst, those are not social science questions. Which is the best form of government? Again, you can describe various forms of government and you can look at the outcomes of those forms of government. But the conclusion of which is best is a normative question that you can't answer with social science or empirical research. Some other things, right? You want it to be doable. Like, I'm really, really interested in knowing like how terrorist organizations recruit people into blowing themselves up. But that's not something that I can do right now. So I'm not going to ask that question. It's also nice if your question is with these sorts of begins with like why and how or to what extent or under what conditions, just because those are a little bit easier questions to answer. And it's also good if there's like multiple possible answers to your question. That way, when you find something in the end, it becomes interesting to people no matter what. You don't want to put all this time into a research project and then find out that you were wrong and then you have nothing to do with all of that work. It's best if your question is like if it's under what conditions, then no matter what you find, you can write that paper, right? But if the question is something about like, uh, is it only women of a certain type that choose to have abortions? And then you find out, no, it's not. Well, then you could try and write your paper about how it's not women of that type that have abortions. It's all kinds of women that have abortions. And people will say, yeah, we already knew that. Why did you ask such a specific question? So it's easier if you like sort of write it in a way that, right? Like my question in the recent paper is, are newspaper reporters ideologically biased in the way they cover the news? Whether you find the answer is yes, no, or sometimes you can write a paper about that. Also, it helps if you focus on a relationship. That's because the statistical tools we use focus on a relationship, so then it makes the analyses at the end easier, but also because it makes it easier to get published. You don't want to have your whole life be trying to prove other people wrong because they're going to always find flaws with your research. So if you focus your research on saying white people are right, but maybe they haven't thought about this, and other people are right, but maybe they haven't thought about this, then that makes everybody happy and they're less likely to fight back because you're suggesting that they're right, they just maybe didn't think about these situations. Saying that somebody's wrong is a very hard thing to prove because we talk in generalities and averages and like most of the time. So you would have to demonstrate that most of the time something does not occur in order to show somebody wrong. And typically people will reason against whatever you find that suggests that maybe they're wrong. So your research questions, there's all kinds of places you could get questions from. I hope that you're the type of person that's always asking questions about everything, like almost everything I read, almost everything I listen to, almost everything I watch on TV. I'm just intellectually curious. I just have lots of questions about things. And you don't have to be like that where you have questions about everything, but I would hope in your life that you do have, like, there's things that make you wonder and question and you want to understand things better. Life's so boring if you go about life just accepting things as they are and never trying to understand why things are the way they are. Seems like such a sad way to live. BYU Idaho wants people to be lifelong learners. In order to be a lifelong learner, you have to be a lifelong curious person. And you should let that curiosity sometimes move you to asking research questions that you can answer empirically. You'll have the tools from this class that you can explore those answers. Even if you don't write a formal research paper, you'll have the tools that you can find the answers to some questions that you have in life that make you curious. And then use the scientific process when it's appropriate. Use the Holy Ghost when it's appropriate to help you find answers to the questions. So, the literature review. If you have some question on some topic, the first thing you do is conduct a literature review to find everything that's been done on that topic. And then you can fill in those gaps with ideas from some other literature. When I say literature, I don't mean works of fiction. Literature is all of the scientific research published on a topic. Nobody knows all the literature. So you decide that when you're writing it up. I'll show you how you decide that in another time, but this is just the overview, right? So there's some people who study social networks, and they've thought a lot about how the friends you have or the people you interact with influence your thoughts and behaviors and attitudes and all those sorts of things. So that would be literature one, right? You would look for all of the research on how people's friends and family and all that stuff influences people. You might think that it doesn't. The reality is that it does. The people around you, especially the ones closest to you, have a strong influence on what you think. Right? You could come home one day and talk to your friends and say, "Hey, I've decided this." And if they all disagree with you, you're going to have some reaction that will influence your future attitudes about that. Or you might say, "I've decided to do this." And their reaction to what you tell them that you're going to do is going to have an influence on whether or not you do that. That's what we're talking about when we say social network influences things. So you want to find all the scientific research on that topic and summarize it. And if you think that you can just find 10 sources on that topic and you'll have any sense of what's been done, you're crazy, right? There's hundreds of things that have been written on that topic, and you want to summarize it as best as you possibly can. And then, right, the people who do that social network research, they've probably never thought specifically about conspiracy theories. Like, what happens when you're sitting at home and somebody shares a conspiracy theory with you? How is it that your friends and the other people around you, when you hear that conspiracy theory, how does that influence whether or not you're going to believe that conspiracy theory? You can sort of see this stuff in social media, right? Somebody will post some conspiracy theory on social media, and then they'll have friends that like it and say, "Yes, that's right." And they'll have other friends that say, "You're crazy," and they'll post something from Snopes that tells them that they're wrong. And the way that one's social network thinks about a conspiracy theory is going to influence what that individual thinks about the conspiracy theory. But it seems unlikely to me that anybody has ever explored that specific topic. That's why I chose it for this class. So you're not going to go looking for how do social networks influence conspiracy theories. Hopefully you would find nothing on that, right? You're going to find everything about social networks. Then there's a whole other set of literature all about why people believe conspiracy theories. And you're going to summarize all of that literature about why people believe conspiracy theories. And you're going to call that literature 2. Why do people believe conspiracy theories? There's a whole lot of stuff. I've got an article there that helps you to get started. And so you look at all of that and then you summarize that. Again, there's probably like 50 to 100 articles on why people, maybe even longer. Bernard Bailyn is like, basically makes it sound like the United States was formed based on conspiracy theories. But anyhow, there's a lot of literature on that, right? So then you summarize the most important pieces of that literature. Then you're going to combine all that information together. You're going to say, well, social network research suggests that if you say something and nobody in your social network agrees with you, you're less likely to think that that's a good idea. But if you say something and everyone agrees with you, you're more likely to think that that's a good idea. So then if we take that and think about conspiracy theories, then maybe when you share a conspiracy theory with your social network, they're going to influence whether you believe a conspiracy theory, right? And then you put something together that sort of summarizes that. Now, you're not going to be able to find maybe 10 pieces of research that combines them together. That might be harder to do. Maybe you're using a little more inductive reasoning, a little bit more logic as you're writing that section. But there's going to be some literature that you'll focus on specifically, like this thing in social network really, really suggests that the argument I'm going to make is right. And then this thing from conspiracy theories points to my argument. And so you might spend more time just focusing on a couple of pieces of literature as you're making that argument, but then you're merging them together, and then that becomes your hypothesis, right? Something about how your social network influences whether or not you're going to believe a conspiracy theory. The introduction, after you've done all that other stuff, then you go back and write the introduction because that just sort of summarizes your paper. I don't require you to write an introduction, but it's just important for you to know you don't start with your introduction. You start with literature 1, literature 2, merge them together, hypothesis, and then you write the other sections of your paper. But it is important for you to know that like the introduction is something that is a brief summary of the entire paper. So when you're looking at research, you can read the introduction and know what the paper is about without reading the whole paper. You can also read the abstract. The abstract is a 1-paragraph summary of the whole paper. So basically, I read an abstract to know what the paper is about. If I need to know a little more, I read the introduction. If I don't know it from there, I read the conclusion. And then rarely do I read anything else in the paper. So then you could practice this, right? It would be good to talk with someone around you about voting behavior. Like you could say, okay, why do people vote the way they do? So voting behavior is like one literature, right, that you could think about, but then you could think about something else that might influence that, like how does if a person's rural or urban influence their voting behavior? So try to think of one on your own, some kind of a research question related to voting behavior, and share it with your neighbor. Go ahead and pause and do that. So in class, this would be more interactive. In this, it's not, right? But again, if you have questions, join me on Campus Wire on Monday. Happy to answer any questions you have. Other than that, I wish you all luck.